This is a word you've known for as long as you can remember. It was there before you learned any science, before explanations, before formulas. Gravity is the reason things fall, the reason your feet stay on the ground, the reason the world feels stable, dependable, and predictable. It is so familiar that it rarely feels like a mystery. It does not announce itself. It does not flicker or glow. It is always present, always working, and almost never noticed. You do not feel gravity as an action. You feel it as normality, as the quiet assumption that down exists, as the certainty that when you let go of something, it will return to the ground without hesitation. Because of that familiarity, gravity feels small, simple, solved. But gravity is not simple, and it is not small. What you experience in everyday life is only the gentlest surface expression of something that operates across unimaginable distances and times. The same influence that keeps you standing here also shapes the motion of planets, the birth of stars, the structure of galaxies, and the slow evolution of the universe itself. It governs paths that take millions of years to complete. It bends time in subtle but measurable ways. It decides what can exist, how long it can last, and how it eventually ends. And yet, it never raises its voice. Tonight, we are not going to rush toward extremes or spectacles. We will start exactly where gravity begins for all of us, with weight, with balance, with the simple act of standing still. And from there, slowly and carefully, we will follow this familiar force outward, until it no longer behaves the way our intuition expects, until it stops feeling like a pull at all, until it becomes something quieter, deeper, and far more fundamental than the word we thought we understood. Not to overwhelm, not to impress, but to see gravity clearly at every scale it touches. When you stand up from a chair, there is a brief moment where your body negotiates with the world. Muscles tighten, your balance shifts, your weight transfers from one arrangement to another, and all of it happens so smoothly that it rarely reaches conscious awareness. This quiet negotiation is gravity at work, not as an abstract concept, but as a constant background condition of being human. It is the reason effort exists in the first place. It is why standing feels different from lying down, and why climbing a staircase feels fundamentally unlike descending it. Weight is not something you actively perceive. You notice it only when it changes, when you lift something heavier than expected, when your arms tire faster than you thought they would, when your legs feel unsteady after standing too long. Most of the time, weight fades into the background. It becomes part of what normal feels like. Your body learns gravity early, long before language. As an infant, you discover that some movements require effort and others do not. That letting go has consequences. That falling is not just motion, but a loss of control. Even now, gravity teaches you constantly without explanation. You do not need to be told which way is down. Your inner ear senses orientation. Your muscles make constant micro-adjustments to keep you upright. Your nervous system solves a physics problem every second of your life silently and continuously. Walking across a room is not simple. It is a controlled series of near falls. Each step involves lifting your body against gravity and then allowing yourself to tip forward, trusting that the next foot will arrive in time. Balance is not the absence of falling. It is falling carefully in the right direction, over and over again. Gravity is the reason movement costs energy. Without it, motion would feel entirely different. There would be no natural resistance, no sense of effort tied to height or direction. Up and down would lose their meaning. There would be motion, but no preference, no bias toward rest. When you drop an object, it accelerates, not because it wants to move, but because gravity allows no neutrality. There is no stillness in free space near a massive body. There is only motion waiting to happen. This is easy to accept when the distances are small. A cup falls from a table, a ball rolls downhill, a jump ends the same way it begins, back on the ground. At this scale, gravity feels like a rule, not a mystery. Things fall, heavy things feel heavier, height matters. But even here, intuition quietly simplifies what is actually happening. You feel weight as pressure in your feet, tension in your muscles, compression in your joints. But weight is not a property of the object itself. It is not something stored inside you. It is the result of interaction, a relationship between your mass and the planet beneath you. If Earth was smaller, you would weigh less. If it were larger, you would weigh more. Nothing about you would change. Only the relationship would. This is not how it feels personal, it feels intrinsic. You feel heavy or light as if that sensation belongs to you alone. Gravity disguises itself well. When you sit down, your weight does not disappear, it transfers. The chair receives it, the floor receives it, the planet receives it. Everything you touch is quietly bearing weight, passing it along, distributing it downward through layers of material until it reaches something massive enough to absorb it, without noticeable movement. This constant downward transfer creates the illusion of stability. The ground feels solid because it pushes back. It resists the tendency of your body to fall further. You experience this resistance as support. Gravity alone would not let you stand. Standing is a balance between gravity and structure. Remove either one, and the experience collapses. This balance shapes architecture, posture, and habit. Buildings grow upward only as far as materials can resist the pull downward. Bones thicken where loads are greatest. Muscles strengthen in response to the work gravity demands of them. Even rest is defined by gravity. Lying down is not the absence of weight. It is the redistribution of it across a larger area. Pressure spreads, effort decreases. The body relaxes not because gravity is gone, but because it has been negotiated differently. These are not dramatic effects. They are persistent ones, so persistent that they fade from notice. And yet, every motion you make contains gravity within it. Reaching for a glass, opening a door, turning your head. Each action subtly alters the distribution of mass, and gravity responds immediately. Your muscles anticipate this response, compensating before imbalance becomes obvious. Most of this happens below awareness, refined over years of living inside a gravitational field. This familiarity can make gravity feel passive, as if it simply waits for things to happen. But gravity is not waiting. It is shaping every possibility before action even begins. Consider jumping. For a moment, your feet leave the ground. You feel light, briefly separated. But the arc of your jump is already decided the instant you leave the surface. You're not escaping gravity, you're participating in it. Even at the highest point of the jump, where upward motion slows, gravity has not weakened. It has been acting continuously, converting motion into stillness and then back again. This is where intuition begins to simplify too much. We tend to think of gravity as something that turns on when things fall, but nothing ever escapes it. There is no pause, no exemption. What you feel as weightlessness during a jump is not the absence of gravity. It is the absence of support. Your body and the ground are briefly falling together, even though the distance is small. This distinction matters, because it hints at something deeper. Gravity does not require contact. It does not need touch. It does not weaken when things separate by small distances. It simply exists everywhere, all the time. At human scale, gravity feels uniform. Down is down, up is up. But this uniformity is an illusion created by proximity. You're so close to Earth, relative to its size, that gravity feels the same everywhere you go. But even across a single room, gravity is slightly stronger at your feet than at your head. The difference is too small to feel, too small to matter in daily life. But it is real. Gravity does not snap into place at the surface. It does not begin where the ground begins. It extends outward, fading slowly without edge or boundary. You live deep inside Earth's gravitational presence, so deep that you mistake it for the default state of reality. This is why the idea of falling feels local, personal, temporary. But falling never really stops. When you stand still, you are not static. You're being held in a dynamic balance between downward pull and upward resistance. When you walk, you're redirecting that pull into forward motion. When you sit, you're resting inside it. There is no neutral position, only different ways of accommodating gravity. This quiet force beneath movement is patient. It does not demand attention. It does not announce consequences loudly. It simply persists. And because it persists, it becomes easy to underestimate. At this scale, gravity feels like a background rule of the environment, something like air pressure or temperature, important but not profound. Yet even here, in the most familiar moments of weight and balance, gravity is already doing more than holding you down. It is teaching your body how to exist. It is shaping behavior, posture, architecture, and instinct. It is deciding what feels natural and what feels impossible, and this is only the beginning. Because everything you experience as falling, standing, resting, or moving is happening within a much larger story. One where gravity does not simply act on bodies, but organizes systems, sculpts paths, and quietly governs motion on scales where down no longer makes sense at all. From here, the ground beneath your feet will remain familiar, but the idea of falling will begin to stretch. When you place your hand on a table, you do not question why it stops. The surface is there. It meets your skin. It holds your weight without effort or explanation. Surfaces feel fundamental. Floors, chairs, beds, sidewalks, stairs. They form the stable background of daily life. They define where movement ends and rest begins. Gravity is the reason surfaces exist as surfaces at all. Without gravity, a floor would not feel like a floor. It would be an arbitrary plane in space, no more meaningful than a wall or a ceiling. Its ability to support you depends entirely on the fact that gravity presses you toward it, creating contact, pressure, and resistance. What you experience as solidity is not just material strength. It is material strength responding to gravity. The ground does not hold you because it wants to. It holds you because gravity insists that you and the ground occupy the same direction. The surface simply refuses to compress further. This is why directions feel obvious. Up, down, forward, back. Of these, only down feels absolute. You can turn around and forward changes. You can lie down and left becomes right. But down remains fixed, unquestioned, always reliable. Down is not a direction in space. It is a relationship with mass. Down points toward the center of the Earth, not because the planet has a surface, but because it has gravity. Everywhere on Earth, down means inward. This seems obvious only because you have never lived without it. Imagine a world where gravity did not define a single preferred direction, where there was no reason for objects to settle, no reason for surfaces to accumulate beneath you. In such a place, the idea of a floor would be meaningless. There would be structures, perhaps, but no orientation, no natural way to decide which side should support weight. On Earth, gravity solves this problem silently. It chooses a direction and enforces it everywhere. This enforcement shapes landscapes long before it shapes human experience. Mountains do not rise arbitrarily. They are limited by gravity's insistence that material eventually collapse inward. Cliffs erode downward. Rivers follow gradients created by gravity, not because water prefers movement, but because gravity prefers descent. Every surface you see has been negotiated with gravity over time. A flat plane is not flat by accident. It is the result of material settling, spreading, and eroding until gravity has minimized height differences as much as possible. Steep slopes represent temporary defiance. Eventually, gravity wins. Even the idea of ground level is not a property of Earth's surface. It is a property of gravity's influence on matter. Ground is where matter has finished falling for now. When you sit on a chair, gravity pulls you downward. The chair pushes back upward. This exchange creates stillness. Stillness is not the absence of forces, it is balance. This is easy to forget because balance feels like nothing. It feels like rest. But rest is active. It requires constant resistance. If the chair weakens, if the surface fractures, gravity immediately reasserts motion. This is why broken surfaces are dangerous. A missing step, a loose tile, an unseen edge. They interrupt the expected conversation between gravity and structure. Your body expects the ground to be there. It plans movements around that expectation. When the surface fails, gravity does not hesitate. It does not slow down to confirm. This expectation runs so deep that you rarely consider how learned it is. You trust surfaces without thinking. You step forward assuming the ground will arrive beneath your foot at the right moment. This trust is gravity made habitual. Children learn this trust slowly. They fall often. They misjudge distance, height, and support. Their bodies are learning not just coordination, but the rules gravity enforces. Over time, these rules become internalized. You develop an instinctive sense of where surfaces should be, how far down a step is, how high a chair sits, how much effort it takes to rise. Gravity trains perception as much as it trains muscle. Because of this, direction feels natural, but it is not universal. Down is meaningful only near something massive. The farther you move from Earth, the less absolute this direction becomes. At the scale of a room, down is constant. At the scale of a mountain, it still feels constant. But Earth is curved. Down at one location points in a slightly different direction than down somewhere else. You do not notice this because gravity bends perception towards simplicity. Surfaces appear flat because gravity pulls you so strongly inward that curvature becomes negligible over human distances. The planet's roundness disappears beneath the insistence of gravity's pull. This is not because Earth is small, it is because you are close. Closeness is important. The experience of gravity changes with distance, even though intuition resists this idea. From the ground, gravity feels uniform and permanent, but it weakens with height, slowly, imperceptibly. Climb a mountain and gravity pulls you slightly less. Orbit the Earth, and gravity still pulls you strongly enough to keep you circling the planet indefinitely. This contradicts the everyday idea that gravity belongs to surfaces, that it starts at the ground and stops above it. Surfaces do not create gravity, they respond to it. This distinction matters because it prepares us for a shift in understanding. When astronauts float inside a spacecraft, they are not beyond gravity's reach. They are simply no longer supported by a surface. The floor is falling with them. Weightlessness is not the absence of gravity, it is the absence of resistance. This means that surfaces are not just passive stages, they are active participants in shaping experience. They provide the upward force that defines weight. Without surfaces, gravity expresses itself differently, not as pressure, but as motion. On Earth, surfaces are everywhere. They catch us before motion becomes obvious. They convert gravity's pull into stillness. This makes gravity feel static, but it is not. If Earth suddenly vanished beneath your feet, there would be no pause, no moment of confusion. Gravity would simply continue, uninterrupted, pulling you along a path you rarely have reason to imagine. This thought is unsettling not because of speed or danger, but because it reveals how dependent orientation is on context. Up and down feel meaningful only because surfaces exist to enforce them. Even language reflects this. We associate down with heaviness, difficulty, sadness, up with ease, success, aspiration. These metaphors are not arbitrary. They are grounded, literally, in gravity. Effort increases when moving upward. Rest comes when moving downward. These physical truths become emotional ones over time. Gravity shapes not only movement but meaning. This shaping is subtle and cumulative. It does not announce itself. It simply persists long enough to become invisible, and yet gravity is never uniform across a surface. Even a perfectly flat floor experiences tiny variations in gravitational pull due to Earth's uneven mass distribution beneath it. Mountains tug slightly. Dense rock pulls more strongly than empty space. The ground beneath you is not gravitationally identical from one step to the next. You do not feel this. Your body is not sensitive enough, but instruments can measure it. This tells us something important. Gravity is not just a downward arrow, it is a field, a presence that varies continuously across space. Surfaces exist within this field, they do not define it. The reason directions feel obvious is not because the universe prefers order, but because gravity simplifies experience near massive objects. It compresses complexity into a single axis. It gives you a sense of orientation that feels natural, stable, and unquestionable. But this simplification hides something deeper. Because if gravity can define direction so completely here, it can redefine it elsewhere. And when surfaces disappear, when gravity no longer translates into stillness, motion takes over. The certainty of down begins to dissolve. The ground beneath you still exists, still holding you, but the idea that gravity belongs to surfaces, or that direction is fixed, will not survive much longer. Because beyond this familiar held ground, gravity does not just support, it guides, it curves paths, and it allows falling to continue forever without ever reaching a floor. When you imagine something in orbit, it is easy to picture it as suspended, held in place, balanced delicately between falling and flying. This image feels natural because it borrows from everyday experience. You know what it means to hold something up. You know what it means to let it fall. Orbit, in the human imagination, often becomes a compromise between the two. But nothing in orbit is being held, nothing is hovering, nothing is suspended, everything in orbit is falling. This is not a metaphor, it is a description of motion. To understand this, it helps to return once more to the most familiar kind of falling. Drop a stone and it moves straight down. Its path is short. The ground arrives quickly. The story ends almost immediately. This is falling in its simplest form, limited by proximity. Now imagine throwing that stone forward instead of dropping it. Not gently, but with intention. The stone moves forward and downward at the same time, tracing a curve through the air. Gravity pulls it down. Forward motion carries it onward. Eventually, the ground still arrives. The curve ends, the stone stops. This is where intuition usually rests. Falling ends when something hits the ground. But the curve itself is the important part. It reveals that falling is not inherently vertical. It is directional, shaped by motion. If you throw the stone faster, the curve stretches farther. The stone travels more distance before meeting the ground. The downward pull remains the same, but the forward motion delays the end. Throw it faster still, and the curve lengthens again. The stone stays aloft longer. The path becomes shallower. At no point does gravity weaken. At no point does falling stop. Only the balance between downward pull and sideways motion changes. This is where the surface of the Earth quietly interferes with understanding, because the ground curves too. The Earth is not flat, but its curvature is gentle compared to human distances. When you throw a stone, the ground rises to meet it long before the planet's curvature matters. But imagine a throw that is not limited by muscle or material. Imagine throwing an object fast enough that as it falls, the Earth curves away beneath it at the same rate. The object is still falling. Gravity still pulls it inward, but the surface never arrives. The object keeps missing the ground. This is orbit. Nothing magical happens at this speed. There is no moment where gravity turns off, no transition from falling to floating. The object simply falls around the Earth instead of into it. From the object's perspective, nothing changes. It is always falling inward. From the planet's perspective, the object is perpetually arriving but never quite getting there. This reframing is uncomfortable at first because it breaks a deeply learned association. We associate falling with ending, with impact, with rest. Orbit has none of these. Orbit is falling without conclusion. This is why astronauts feel weightless. Not because gravity is absent, but because there is no surface to stop the fall. The spacecraft, the astronauts, and everything inside are all falling together. There is no upward resistance, no ground pushing back. So weight disappears. This is profoundly counterintuitive. From Earth it looks like astronauts are floating. From their own frame of experience, they are not floating upward or downward at all. They are moving forward continuously while gravity curves their path inward. The sensation of weight depends entirely on resistance. Without resistance, gravity becomes invisible. This invisibility leads to one of the most persistent misconceptions about space. That orbit exists where gravity becomes weak. In reality, gravity in low Earth orbit is only slightly weaker than at the surface, strong enough to pull oceans into tides, strong enough to hold the moon in its path, strong enough to curve space-time measurably. The difference is not strength. It is geometry. On Earth, gravity's pull is constantly interrupted by the ground. In orbit, it is allowed to express itself fully as motion. This changes how we should think about falling. Falling is not something that happens briefly between supports. It is the natural state of motion in a gravitational field. What you experience on the ground is falling that has been arrested. What you experience in orbit is falling that has been allowed to continue. This idea scales outward naturally. The moon is not circling the Earth because it is delicately balanced. It is falling toward Earth continuously. Its sideways motion ensures that it never arrives. Earth in turn is falling toward the Sun, always inward, never arriving. The planets are not held in place by invisible tethers. They are in constant motion, tracing curved paths dictated by gravity and inertia. Even the Sun is not stationary. It is falling within the gravitational influence of the galaxy, carried along by a complex web of mass and motion. At every scale, orbit replaces rest. Stillness becomes rare. Motion becomes the norm. This challenges another deeply ingrained intuition, that the universe prefers stability. At human scale, stability is valuable. It allows rest, construction, permanence. But at cosmic scale, stability often means collapse. A system that does not move relative to gravity does not remain suspended. It falls inward, it compresses, it changes. Orbit is not a fragile exception to gravity. It is one of gravity's most natural expressions. Once you accept this, the idea of falling begins to stretch beyond surfaces entirely. Falling does not require a floor. It does not require a direction that feels like down. It does not even require an end. It only requires mass and motion. This reframing also alters how we think about distance and time. In orbit, distance is not something to be crossed once. It is something to be traced repeatedly. Paths loop, time becomes cyclical. An astronaut circling Earth experiences sunrise and sunset multiple times a day, not because time speeds up, but because motion reorganizes experience. The Earth below turns slowly. The spacecraft moves quickly. Gravity binds them together without ever forcing contact. This layered motion creates a strange kind of intimacy at a distance, close enough to feel gravity strongly, far enough to never touch. Here, intuition falters again. We're accustomed to thinking of proximity as closeness, but gravity complicates this. You can be close to Earth and still falling forever. You can be far away and still bound. Distance alone does not determine connection. Motion matters just as much. This is why the idea of escape velocity exists at all. Not because gravity ends beyond a certain point, but because motion can overwhelm curvature. To escape is not to outrun gravity, but to stop falling back towards something. This requires immense speed. Not because gravity is dramatic, but because it is persistent. Even at great distances, gravity continues to shape paths subtly. Trajectories bend, timelines stretch. Nothing truly moves in a straight line once gravity is involved. Straight lines are idealizations, approximations that work only when gravity's influence is negligible. Orbit reveals this truth gently. There is no sudden revelation, just the quiet realization that falling can be endless. This realization has consequences. It means that the universe is not arranged around platforms and supports. There are no floors between worlds, no shelves holding planets in place. Everything is in motion because everything is falling. The stillness you experience on Earth is local and temporary. It exists only because you are pressed against a surface that resists motion. Beyond that surface, motion resumes immediately. This is why space feels alien. Not because it is empty, but because it removes resistance. In space, gravity is no longer hidden behind support, it becomes geometry, curved paths instead of downward pressure. This shift prepares the mind for something even more difficult to accept. If falling can continue forever without impact, then gravity is not about pulling things toward rest. It is about shaping motion over time. It is less like a force and more like a guide, and guides do not stop you, they redirect you. As we move outward from Earth, surfaces will disappear entirely. Only paths remain, only motion. Down will lose its meaning, up will vanish. Falling will no longer feel like descent, but like participation in a much larger pattern. Orbit is the first place where gravity stops feeling like a rule and starts feeling like structure. And once you see falling this way, it becomes impossible to think of gravity as something that merely pulls things down. It becomes something that holds everything in motion, forever, without ever needing to let go. Long before a planet has oceans or air or a surface you could stand on, it begins as something far less coherent. Not a world, but a region. A loose gathering of material drifting through space, sharing a neighborhood rather than a shape. At this early stage, there is no clear boundary, no up or down, no center you could point to with certainty. There is only matter, moving slowly, responding to gravity in small, cumulative ways. Dust grains pass near one another and alter their paths slightly. Rocks drift, collide, and sometimes stick. Fragments gather not because they intend to, but because gravity makes separation less likely than closeness. This is how worlds begin, not with assembly, but with reluctance to drift apart. At human scale, gravity feels like a force that pulls things down. At planetary scale, it behaves more like a preference, a quiet bias toward togetherness. Material that wanders too far feels a faint tug back. Material that drifts closer feels that tugs strengthen. Over time, imbalance grows. This is slow, so slow that nothing about it feels like construction. There is no moment of decision, no blueprint, and yet, eventually, there is a center. Once enough material gathers in one region, gravity stops being evenly distributed. The collective mass begins to dominate its surroundings. Nearby material no longer wanders freely. it falls inward. This falling does not resemble the falling you know. There is no surface to meet it, no direction that feels obvious. Material approaches from all sides. Paths curve, collisions become frequent. What emerges from this chaos is not a jagged pile, but something unexpectedly smooth. Roundness is not a design choice, it is gravity asserting symmetry. Any protrusion sticks out farther from the centre than the material around it. That distance matters. Gravity pulls more strongly toward the centre than toward the edges. Over time, high points collapse inward. Low points fill. This is why planets become spheres, not immediately, not perfectly, but inevitably. Once a body grows large enough, gravity overwhelms the strength of its materials. Rock flows slowly, metal yields eventually. Ice behaves less like ice and more like stone. At this scale, solidity is temporary. Given enough time and mass, everything behaves like a fluid. This is difficult to reconcile with everyday experience. Rocks feel permanent, mountains feel immovable, but these sensations belong to short timescales. From gravity's perspective, a mountain is a brief wrinkle. A planet is patient enough to smooth it out. This is why small objects remain irregular. Asteroids tumble with uneven shapes. They lack the mass to force themselves into roundness. But once gravity crosses a threshold, shape becomes non-negotiable. A world rounds itself not because it wants to be smooth, but because a symmetry cannot survive sustained inward pull. This rounding is the first sign that gravity is no longer just guiding motion, it is enforcing structure. As a planet grows, its grip strengthens, not just at the surface, but throughout its volume. Material inside the planet feels pressure from every direction. Layers compress, heat builds. Gravity does not merely hold the planet together, it actively reshapes it from within. Heavier materials sink, lighter materials rise. The interior differentiates, organizing itself by density. This process is slow and silent. No explosion, no announcement, and yet it defines everything that follows. A planet with a dense core behaves differently than one without. Magnetic fields emerge, geological activity persists. All of this traces back to gravity's insistence that matter arrange itself efficiently around a center. Once a planet forms, gravity becomes territorial. Nearby objects feel its presence long before they encounter its surface. Paths curve inward. Orbits become possible. The planet claims a region of space, not by boundary, but by influence. This influence does not end abruptly. It fades gradually. There is no edge where gravity stops working, only distances where its effect becomes less dominant than other masses nearby. This is why planets can refuse to let go without ever touching. A moon does not need to rest on a planet to belong to it. It simply needs to fall in a way that never ends. This refusal to let go feels intuitive at first. A large mass holds on to smaller ones, but intuition struggles with scale. Gravity's grip extends far beyond what surfaces suggest. A planet holds not only moons but dust, gas and debris, shaping rings and clearing paths. It sculpts space itself, carving regions where motion becomes ordered. This ordering is fragile in appearance but persistent in reality. A moon may drift slightly, an orbit may wobble, but gravity works continuously to restore coherence. This persistence is why planetary systems last for billions of years, not because they are static, but because gravity allows motion to repeat. Repetition creates history. A planet remembers its formation through its gravity. It carries the record of past collisions in its spin, the memory of early chaos in the tilt of its axis. Gravity does not erase history, it encodes it. From the surface, this grip feels comforting. The ground stays beneath you, the sky stays above, but this comfort hides constraint. To leave a planet is not just to move away from a surface, it is to overcome the accumulated insistence of gravity. Every meter upward costs energy because gravity does not weaken quickly. It resists departure patiently, steadily. This is why escape feels dramatic, not because gravity is violent, but because it is relentless. At planetary scale, gravity defines belonging. To be part of a planet is not to touch it, but to move in response to it. Atmospheres cling because gravity allows them to. Oceans remain because gravity insists they stay. When gravity weakens, worlds change. A small planet loses its air. Water escapes. Surface features freeze into permanence. A large planet holds heat longer, retains motion inside, remains active. Thus, gravity does not just assemble worlds, it determines their lifespans. It decides which planets stay alive geologically and which fall silent early. This decision is not intentional. It is a consequence of mass and distance. Gravity does not favour habitability, it favours cohesion. From this perspective, Earth is not special because it has gravity. It is special because it has just enough. Enough to hold air without crushing it. Enough to retain water without trapping it permanently. Enough to stay active without tearing itself apart. This balance feels miraculous only because we experience it from within. To gravity, it is simply one outcome among many. Planetary grip also alters time. Processes that seem slow on Earth, erosion, drift, change, are paced by gravity's pull. Stronger gravity accelerates collapse. Weaker gravity prolongs fragility. Time stretches or compresses depending on how firmly a world holds itself together. This is where the idea of a planet as an object begins to dissolve. A planet is not a thing, it is a process, a continuous negotiation between inward pull and outward motion, between collapse and rotation, between heat and cooling. Gravity sits at the centre of this negotiation, never resting, never concluding. The refusal to let go is not stubbornness, it is identity. A planet is defined by how it holds, and this holding is not limited to what you can see. Gravity reaches outward, shaping the space around the planet, guiding the motion of everything nearby. It creates a neighbourhood, a zone of influence. Beyond that zone, other masses compete, pulls overlap, paths become complex. This complexity is the beginning of something larger, because planets do not exist alone. They are shaped by stars, they move within systems, they contribute their own gravity to something even greater. The grip that holds a planet together is itself held by something else. And as we move outward, gravity's role will shift again. It will stop assembling worlds and begin assembling systems. The refusal to let go will no longer belong to a single planet, but to entire families of objects bound together across vast distances. The familiar feeling of being held by the ground will stretch beyond the surface, beyond the planet, into a structure so large that roundness itself will no longer be enough to describe it. Because gravity does not stop once a world is complete. It simply moves on to the next scale, carrying everything with it. When gravity is described as a pull, it sounds simple and direct. Something attracts something else. A force reaches out across space and draws objects together. This language is useful at human scale. It works well enough when distances are short and motions are slow. It matches how falling feels, how weight is experienced, how effort is measured. But as soon as we move beyond surfaces and into sustained motion, this description begins to fail. Objects in orbit are not being tugged like weights on a string. Planets are not constantly correcting their paths. Moons do not wobble as if they are barely being held. Instead, motion unfolds smoothly, predictably, with a quiet consistency that suggests guidance rather than force. This is where gravity stops behaving like a pull and starts behaving like a shape. To see this, it helps to think again about motion itself. If there were no gravity at all, motion would be simple. An object set in motion would continue in a straight line forever. No preference, no curve, no return. This straight line motion feels intuitive because it matches everyday expectations in small, controlled environments. Roll a puck across smooth ice, and it travels predictably. Remove friction, and it travels farther. Gravity complicates this simplicity. The presence of mass changes what straight means. An object moving near a massive body does not abruptly change direction. There is no sharp turn, no visible correction. Its path bends gently, continuously, as if space itself was subtly tilted. This bending is not something the object decides to do. It is not responding to a signal. It is simply following the path available to it. At this scale, gravity does not pull objects off straight paths. It reshapes the paths themselves. This distinction is subtle but profound. If gravity were only a force acting on objects, then motion would consist of straight lines interrupted by constant corrections. But that is not what we observe. Instead, orbits are smooth curves, trajectories are predictable arcs. Motion feels natural, as though the universe prefers these paths. This preference comes from geometry, not intent. Space around mass is not neutral, it is structured. Imagine walking across a gently sloped landscape in thick fog. You cannot see the terrain, only your immediate surroundings. You walk straight ahead, step by step. From your perspective, you're not turning, you're simply walking forward, but from above your path curves, guided by the slope beneath you. You're not being pulled sideways, you're responding to the shape of the ground. Gravity works this way, but in dimensions and scales that resist visualization. Objects move along the straightest possible paths available to them. Those paths are curved because space is curved. This is why gravity can act without contact, without signals, without delay. It does not need to reach out and grab anything. It only needs mass to exist. Mass shapes the space around it. Everything else moves through that shaped space. This reframing explains something that the idea of pulling struggles with. If gravity was simply a force between objects, it would act instantaneously or require a medium. It would need a mechanism to transmit influence. But if gravity is geometry, there is nothing to transmit. The shape is already there. An object does not need to be told how to move. It moves according to the structure it inhabits. This is why gravity feels inevitable. Once you're in a gravitational field, motion unfolds as a consequence, not a choice. At human scale, this distinction remains hidden. Surfaces interrupt motion too quickly. Distances are too short for curvature to be obvious. But at planetary and stellar scales, the shaping becomes undeniable. Consider a comet entering the inner solar system. From far away, it moves along a path that seems nearly straight. As it approaches the sun, its path bends more sharply. It swings inward, accelerates, and then curves outward again. At no point does the comet hesitate. There is no moment where it appears confused. Its path is smooth because it is following the shape of space carved by the sun's mass. The comet is not being yanked around. It is tracing a contour. This makes gravity remarkably economical. There is no need for continuous adjustment. No energy is spent on maintaining attraction. Once the geometry is set, motion takes care of itself. This perspective also changes how we think about stability. An orbit is not stable because forces balance. It is stable because the path closes on itself. The shape allows repetition. As long as nothing disturbs the geometry significantly, the motion continues. This explains why gravity can organize systems across enormous distances without becoming chaotic. The invisible shape created by mass provides a framework within which motion unfolds predictably. This framework is not rigid. It overlaps with others. Shapes created by different masses intersect and combine. Where shapes overlap, motion becomes complex. This is why three-body systems are difficult to predict, not because gravity becomes erratic, but because multiple shapes compete. Paths no longer follow a single curvature. They respond to several at once. The result is not randomness, but sensitivity. Small differences in position lead to different trajectories. The system remains deterministic, but intuition struggles to follow it. This again highlights the limitation of thinking in terms of pulls. Forces can be added, vectors can be summed, but shapes interact in subtler ways. They warp one another. They change the context in which motion occurs. This becomes especially important as we move to larger scales. A star shapes the space around it strongly. A planet shapes space locally. A galaxy shapes space over immense distances. These shapes are not separate. They nest within one another. An object moving through the galaxy is simultaneously responding to the star it orbits, the galaxy it belongs to, and the larger structures beyond. Motion becomes layered. At each scale, gravity's role is less about pulling and more about organizing. Paths form naturally, streams of motion emerge, structures persist. This organization is not rigid, it evolves. As mass moves, the shape changes. As the shape changes, motion adjusts. Gravity is dynamic geometry. This dynamic nature is why gravity can transmit change without violating causality. When a massive object moves, the shape of space around it updates. Not instantaneously, but continuously. The change propagates at a finite speed. This propagation is subtle. It is not felt as a shock. It is felt as a gradual shift in what paths are available. This is another reason gravity feels calm. It does not snap. It flows. At this point, Intuition often tries to retreat back to forces because geometry feels abstract. But abstraction is unavoidable at this scale. The idea of pulling breaks down when there is nothing to pull against. In deep space, there is no reference frame that privileges rest. Only paths remain. This is why astronauts in orbit do not feel a force acting on them. They feel motion. They feel free because nothing resists the geometry. This freedom is deceptive. They are not unbound. They're deeply constrained. Their freedom exists only within the shape that gravity provides. If they alter their motion too much, the path changes. The shape reasserts itself. This constraint without pressure is one of gravity's most distinctive features. It governs without contact. It controls without sensation. At cosmic scale, this invisible shaping becomes the primary role of gravity. Galaxies form where space allows matter to collect. Filaments emerge where curvature guides motion along preferred directions. Void regions are not empty by accident. They are regions where shapes discourage accumulation. Matter flows along gradients created not by force but by geometry. This flow is slow, measured in millions and billions of years, but it is consistent. Over time, it builds structure that appears deliberate, even though it is not. This is where the idea of gravity as architecture becomes unavoidable. It does not merely move objects, it defines where objects can go. It creates corridors and basins, hills and valleys in the fabric of space itself. Objects roll along these contours, not because they're compelled, but because those are the available paths. This reframing also helps explain why gravity is so difficult to shield against. You cannot block a shape. You can resist a force, you can push back, you can counteract. But you cannot remove the curvature of space locally without altering mass itself. This makes gravity universal and unavoidable, not because it is aggressive, but because it is foundational. Everything that exists with mass contributes to shaping space. Everything that moves responds. This mutual shaping means that gravity is not something imposed on the universe. It is something the universe does to itself. This self-consistency is why gravity feels less like an interaction and more like a condition. It is always already there. Once this perspective settles, the idea of gravity as an invisible shape begins to feel more natural than the idea of a pull. Falling becomes motion along a contour. Orbit becomes circulation within a basin. Escape becomes leaving one shape for another. Down ceases to be a direction. It becomes a tendency, and this tendency does not belong to objects alone, it belongs to space. As we move outward to even larger scales, this shaping role of gravity will become more pronounced, not less. Force will fade from the story, geometry will take its place. Because beyond stars and planets, gravity's true work is not holding things together. It is drawing the map that everything else must follow. A star does not begin as a light, it begins as weight. Long before there is brightness, heat, or a name, there is only a region of space where matter lingers a little longer than elsewhere. A place where motion slows, where drifting gas does not quite escape. At first, there is nothing you would recognize as an object. No surface, no boundary, just a faint excess of material, spread thinly across distances so large that the idea of density feels almost misplaced. And yet, gravity notices. This is one of gravity's quietest talents. It does not require sharp contrasts. It does not need solidity. Even the smallest imbalance given enough time becomes meaningful. A slightly denser region bends the surrounding paths just enough to encourage more matter to pass through it. Passing matter lingers. Lingering matter deepens the bend. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no moment where emptiness turns into structure. Only a gradual reluctance to disperse. This is how stars are born, not through construction, but through accumulation that cannot quite undo itself. At human scale, weight is something you feel when lifting. It is associated with effort, strain, resistance. At stellar scale, weight is something space itself feels. As gas gathers, gravity's shaping grows stronger. Paths curve inward more decisively. The region begins to behave like a destination. Still, nothing shines. The gas remains cold, diffuse, unremarkable. But gravity does not rush. As more material falls inward, the region contracts. Distances shrink. Motion speeds up. This is not because gravity is becoming aggressive, it is because the geometry is steepening. As space curves more sharply, motion naturally accelerates. The gas begins to compress, not into a surface, but into layers. Pressure rises. This pressure is not applied from the outside. It emerges from gravity's insistence that matter occupy a smaller and smaller region. Here, intuition begins to falter again. We are accustomed to thinking of pressure as something applied by contact, hands pressing, walls containing. But inside a forming star, there are no walls. Gravity itself is the container. As gas falls inward from all directions, it collides with itself. Motion becomes heat, temperature rises. This heating is not incidental, it is inevitable. Every bit of gravitational contraction converts ordered motion into disordered motion. Velocity becomes vibration. Falling becomes warmth. This is how gravity feeds stars, not by delivering fuel but by preparing it. As the core grows denser and hotter, something subtle changes. The inward fall begins to slow, not because gravity weakens, but because another effect emerges. Pressure pushes back. At first, this pressure comes from the motion of particles, jostling and colliding as space tightens. Later, it comes from something far more profound. Nuclear fusion ignites. This is not an explosion. There is no spark. Fusion begins quietly, when conditions become unavoidable. At extreme densities and temperatures, atomic nuclei move fast enough and close enough that gravity's confinement overcomes their mutual repulsion. They merge. When they do, a small amount of mass disappears. It does not vanish. It becomes energy. This energy pushes outward. For the first time, gravity meets a sustained resistance that does not rely on surfaces or structure. The star enters a balance. Gravity pulls inward. Energy pushes outward. This balance is not static. It breathes. It adjusts. But it holds. This holding defines what a star is. A star is not simply a ball of burning gas. It is a negotiation between gravity and energy that lasts millions or billions of years. This negotiation is entirely governed by mass. Mass determines how hard gravity pulls inward. It determines how hot the core becomes. It determines what kinds of fusion are possible. Small stars pull gently. They burn slowly. Their lives stretch long. Large stars pull fiercely. Their cores become extremely hot. They burn quickly, furiously. This relationship is deeply unintuitive. You might expect a larger fuel supply to last longer, but in stars, more mass means more gravity, which means higher pressure, which means faster fusion. The heavier the star, the shorter its life. Gravity gives stars their weight, and that weight sets their pace. Throughout a star's life, gravity continues to feed it, not by adding mass, but by maintaining pressure. Fusion does not run freely. It depends on confinement. If gravity was suddenly reduced, fusion would slow or stop. The star would cool. It would dim. Gravity is not just the cause of a star's birth. It is the condition of its existence. This also means gravity determines how a star ends. As fusion proceeds, the star's core changes. Light elements are fused into heavier ones. Energy production shifts. Eventually, the star reaches a point where fusion can no longer produce enough outward pressure to balance gravity. What happens next depends again on mass. In smaller stars, gravity's pull is modest enough that the star can shed its outer layers gently. The core contracts. The star becomes something quieter, a remnant. In larger stars, gravity refuses to compromise. When outward pressure fails, collapse begins. This collapse is swift but not chaotic. It is gravity reclaiming dominance. The core falls inward. Densities rise beyond anything experienced during the star's life. In the most massive stars, the collapse triggers a rebound. An outward shock tears the star apart. But even here, gravity is not defeated. It simply changes the outcome. The explosion disperses material into space, seeding future stars and planets. The core remains, compressed into something extraordinarily dense, a neutron star. Or, if mass is sufficient, something even more extreme. Throughout all of this, gravity is not dramatic. It does not flare. It does not announce transitions. It simply persists. It feeds stars by allowing matter to gather. It sustains them by maintaining pressure. It ends them by refusing to relax. This makes stellar gravity feel almost personal. Each star carries its own fate in its mass. There is no external decision, no intervention. A star's weight is its destiny. From a distance, stars appear steady. points of light fixed in the sky. But this steadiness is deceptive. Inside every star, gravity and energy are locked in continuous exchange, a dynamic balance that must be maintained at every moment. If fusion briefly intensifies, outward pressure increases, the star expands slightly, gravity weakens, fusion slows. If fusion dips, gravity contracts the core, pressure rises, fusion intensifies. The star self-regulates. Gravity provides the feedback. This regulation allows stars to shine with remarkable consistency for immense spans of time. But consistency should not be mistaken for simplicity. The processes inside stars operate on scales that defy intuition. Pressures millions of times greater than anything on Earth. Temperatures that strip matter to its bare components. And yet, the guiding principle remains the same: mass curves space. Curved space shapes motion. Shaped motion produces structure. Stars are not machines. They are expressions of gravity allowed to run its course under specific conditions. This perspective also reframes the idea of light itself. Starlight is not just energy escaping. It is gravity's work made visible. Every photon leaving a star carries with it a story of confinement, of pressure, of mass converted and released. Even the light that reaches your eyes tonight began as gravity's insistence that matter remain together. At larger scales, stars do not exist in isolation. They gather in groups. They orbit common centers. They contribute their mass to something larger. Each star adds its weight to a collective shape, and as these weights accumulate, gravity's role changes again. It stops shaping individual objects and begins shaping populations. Patterns emerge. Streams of stars, rotating systems. The gravity that once assembled a single star now participates in assembling entire galaxies. But before we move outward, it is worth pausing here. Because stars represent a turning point in gravity's story. Below this scale, gravity organizes matter into objects you could imagine touching: planets, moons, surfaces. At stellar scale, gravity begins to organize energy itself. It controls how matter transforms, how long it shines, how it returns material to space. Gravity becomes not just a sculptor of form, but a regulator of time. A star's lifespan is gravity expressed as duration. And when that lifespan ends, gravity does not withdraw. It simply passes the influence onward. The weight that formed the star does not disappear when the star does. It remains, shaping what comes next. Because gravity does not care about endings. It cares only about mass, motion, and the paths they create. And beyond the scale of individual stars, those paths begin to weave together into structures so vast that even the idea of a single center starts to lose its meaning. This is where stellar weight becomes collective weight, and where gravity's quiet influence grows so large that it can no longer be understood as belonging to any one thing at all. There is a moment, somewhere between planets and stars, where familiar explanations stop helping. Gravity still works, orbits still exist, motion still follows rules, but the language that once felt sufficient begins to feel strained. Up to this point, it has been possible to talk about gravity as something that pulls. Even when we reframed it as shape, the intuition could still lean on analogies, slopes, curves, guidance. Here, those analogies begin to dissolve. Not because gravity becomes more violent or more exotic, but because the assumptions beneath our thinking finally give way. This is the scale where gravity stops behaving like a force in any meaningful experiential sense. At human scale, forces feel local. You push something, it pushes back. You lift, you feel resistance. Cause and effect feel immediate. Even planetary gravity can still be imagined this way. A planet pulls, a moon responds. Distance weakens the effect. But when mass increases enough, and when distances stretch far enough, gravity no longer fits into this picture. Consider a massive star nearing the end of its life. Its gravity is immense, but it is not experienced as pressure or pull by anything outside it. Nearby objects do not feel tugged in the way your hand feels pulled by a weight. Instead, paths bend. Time shifts. Light itself changes behavior. This is the first clear sign that gravity is not acting like a force applied to objects, but as a condition imposed on reality itself. Light has no mass. It cannot be pulled in the ordinary sense. And yet, light bends near massive objects. This alone should break intuition completely. If gravity were simply a force between masses, light should ignore it entirely. There would be nothing to grab onto, nothing to accelerate. But light does not pass straight through regions of strong gravity. Its path curves. Not because light is being pulled, but because the space it travels through is no longer flat. At this point, gravity stops being something that happens to objects and becomes something that happens to space and time. This is not a poetic statement, it is a literal one. Near very massive bodies, distances change subtly. Time passes at different rates, clocks tick differently depending on where they are. These effects are not theoretical curiosities, they are measurable. They are necessary to account for real observations, and they are deeply incompatible with the idea of gravity as a force. Forces act within space and time. Gravity reshapes them. This distinction matters. If gravity were a force, it would operate against a fixed backdrop. Space would be a stage, time would be a clock running independently. But gravity does not play by those rules. Instead, mass alters the stage itself. This means there is no neutral viewpoint from which gravity can be said to act. No external frame where space remains untouched. Every observer is embedded within the same warped structure. This is where intuition truly breaks. We are accustomed to thinking of space as empty and time as uniform. Gravity in that picture is something added. Here, gravity becomes inseparable from the fabric of reality. Remove gravity, and space and time themselves would not behave the way we expect. This realization is not sudden. It emerges slowly as explanations accumulate and then fail. First, force analogies strain. Then geometry takes over. Finally, even geometry begins to feel incomplete, because the geometry itself is dynamic. Space does not merely curve and remain fixed, it evolves. As mass moves, the curvature changes. As energy flows, time responds. Gravity is no longer something that objects do to each other. It is something the universe does to itself. At this scale, the word pull becomes misleading. Nothing is reaching out. Nothing is exerting effort. Instead, objects follow the straightest possible paths available to them. Those paths are curved because the underlying structure is curved. This is not a force acting on motion. It is motion revealing structure. And this is deeply unsettling for intuition, because it removes agency from gravity entirely. There is no directionality imposed from the outside, no preferred action. Everything happens because it cannot happen any other way. Consider freefall again, but stripped of all surfaces and supports. An object in freefall feels no force, no pressure, no strain, and yet its motion is profoundly shaped. This alone should force a pause. If gravity were truly a force, freefall should feel like acceleration. There should be sensation, but there is none. The sensation you associate with gravity, the feeling of weight, is not gravity itself. It is resistance to gravity. When resistance disappears, gravity becomes undetectable locally. This is not a small detail, it is the key. Gravity is unique among influences because it vanishes when you stop fighting it. This is the opposite of how forces behave. Friction disappears when you stop moving. Electric forces can be shielded. Magnetic forces can be redirected. Gravity cannot be shielded. It cannot be turned off. And when you yield to it completely, it becomes invisible. This invisibility is not weakness, it is depth. It means gravity operates at a level beneath sensation. This is why intuition struggles so much here. Human intuition evolved to interpret resistance, pressure and impact, not geometry, not space-time. We're good at feeling pushes and pulls. We're not good at perceiving changes in the structure of reality itself. And yet, those changes are happening all the time. Near Earth, they are small, negligible for daily life. But near massive objects, they dominate behavior. Time slows, distances stretch, causality itself bends. None of this can be understood as a force. At this point, gravity has fully escaped the conceptual box we built for it. It is no longer something added to motion. It is the reason motion has the form it does. This forces a re-evaluation of earlier ideas. When we spoke of gravity shaping paths, that was already a step away from force. Now we see that even shaping is a simplification. Paths are not shaped by gravity, they are shaped by the structure that gravity creates. Gravity is not the sculptor, it is the sculpture. This reframing has consequences for how we think about cause and effect. In everyday thinking, causes precede effects in a straightforward way. A force is applied, An object accelerates. Here, cause and effect are distributed. Mass influences structure. Structure influences motion. Motion influences mass distribution. There is no single moment where gravity acts. It is always already present in the conditions that allow anything to happen at all. This makes gravity feel strangely passive and overwhelmingly powerful at the same time. Passive because it does not intervene. Powerful because nothing escapes its context. At this scale, even the idea of location becomes relative. There is no absolute here or there, only relationships defined by curvature. Distance is no longer just a measure of separation. It is a measure of how space is arranged between 2 points. Time is no longer universal. It depends on where you are and how you move. These are not philosophical statements. They are practical realities that must be accounted for in precision systems. Satellites rely on corrections for gravitational time differences. Navigation depends on understanding how gravity alters signals. The broken intuition is not optional. Reality does not care whether the human mind finds this comfortable. And yet, gravity remains calm. There is no violence in this revelation, no drama. The universe does not behave this way to confuse us. It behaves this way because it has no alternative. This calm inevitability is part of what makes gravity so difficult to internalize. It does not demand attention. It does not announce transitions. It simply stops fitting into our categories. At this point in the journey, something important has happened. Gravity is no longer something you imagine acting on objects. It is something you imagine as underlying everything. This shift is subtle, but once it occurs, there is no way back. You can still use the language of forces when it is convenient. Engineers do, physicists do, but you will know quietly that this is a shorthand, a practical fiction layered over something deeper. Gravity has crossed a threshold. It has stopped behaving like an interaction and started behaving like a condition. And once gravity is understood as a condition, the universe itself begins to look different. Structures become expressions of curvature. Histories become paths through spacetime. Events become intersections of motion within geometry. The next step outward will take this idea even further. Because once gravity is no longer tied to objects or forces, it becomes capable of shaping not just motion and time, but the large-scale structure of the universe itself. At that scale, gravity will not merely bend paths, it will bend history, and the intuition we have already lost will not be returning. For a long time, gravity was described the way humans describe everything they can touch, as an attraction, a pull acting across distance. This description worked because it aligned with experience. Things fell toward the ground, planets moved toward the sun. Heavier objects seem to pull more strongly than lighter ones. At everyday scales, this language feels sufficient. It predicts motion accurately enough. It allows calculations to succeed. It satisfies intuition. But usefulness is not the same as truth. As observations became more precise, cracks began to appear, not in the predictions, but in the meaning behind them. Gravity worked too well, too smoothly, too universally to behave like an ordinary force. Forces act on things. They push or pull objects that already exist within space and time. Gravity did something stranger. It altered the very conditions in which objects existed. This realization did not arrive all at once. It emerged gradually, reluctantly, as explanation after explanation strained under the weight of what gravity was observed to do. One of the earliest signs came from something that should not have been affected at all. Light. Light has no mass. It cannot be pulled in the ordinary sense. It does not slow down when forces act on it. It always moves at the same speed. And yet, light bends when it passes near massive objects. At first, this bending could be dismissed as a curiosity, an anomaly, something to be accounted for later. But the more carefully it was measured, the more undeniable it became. Stars appeared in slightly shifted positions when their light passed near the sun. Signals took longer to travel through regions of strong gravity than expected. If gravity were merely an attraction between masses, none of this should happen. There was nothing for gravity to pull on. This forced a deeper question. Not about gravity's strength, but about its nature. What if gravity was not acting on objects at all? What if it was acting on space itself? This question sounds abstract, but it arises from a simple observation. Motion in gravity is smooth. Objects do not jerk toward masses. They do not hesitate or oscillate unless disturbed by something else. Their paths curve with quiet inevitability. This smoothness suggests guidance rather than compulsion. A pull implies effort. Geometry implies permission. When you roll a ball across a curved surface, the ball is not being pulled sideways. It follows the surface because that is the only path available to it. In this view, gravity does not reach across space to tug on objects. It shapes the space through which objects move. Mass changes the geometry of space and time. Objects move along the straightest possible paths within that geometry. Those paths only appear curved because space itself is curved. This shift from attraction to geometry is not a matter of poetic language. It is a change in what gravity is understood to be. Under this understanding, gravity is no longer something added to the universe. It is part of its structure. Space is not an empty container. Time is not an independent clock. Together they form a fabric that responds to mass and energy. Add mass and the fabric curves. Remove mass and it relaxes. Everything else, motion, orbits, falling, follows from this. This explains why gravity cannot be shielded. You can block a force, you can absorb it, you can redirect it, but you cannot block geometry. There is no wall you can place between an object and the curvature of space itself. There is no insulation against the shape of reality. This is why gravity feels unavoidable without feeling aggressive. It does not act upon you, you exist within it. This reframing also resolves a subtle contradiction that plagued earlier ideas. If gravity were an attraction, then objects in free fall should feel it. They should feel themselves being pulled. But they do not. An astronaut orbiting Earth feels weightless. A falling elevator creates the same sensation briefly. Objects inside float. This weightlessness is not an illusion. It is a direct clue. Gravity disappears when resistance disappears. This is not how forces behave. A force is felt when it accelerates you. Gravity is felt only when something prevents you from following your natural path. The ground presses upward on your feet. The chair presses against your back. These pressures create the sensation of weight. Gravity itself remains silent. In curved space, this makes perfect sense. An object in free fall is not being acted upon. It is moving along a natural path, a geodesic, defined by the geometry around it. There is no force to feel. The sensation of gravity arises only when that motion is interrupted. This is why the ground feels solid, not because gravity pushes you into it, but because it stops you from falling freely. Once this is understood, gravity becomes less like an interaction and more like an environment. It is not something that happens occasionally. It is something that is always already there. This also explains why gravity affects time. If space and time are part of the same structure, then changing one necessarily changes the other. Near massive objects, time runs more slowly. Clocks closer to Earth tick more slowly than clocks farther away. This is not metaphorical, it is measurable. Time is stretched by gravity because time is part of the geometry that gravity shapes. At human scale, this stretching is tiny, imperceptible without instruments. At stellar and galactic scales, it becomes significant. At extreme scales, it becomes dominant. This again defies intuition, because time feels absolute. Seconds feel the same everywhere. Moments feel uniform. But this uniformity is local. It belongs to regions where gravity is weak and motion is slow. As conditions change, time reveals its flexibility. This flexibility is not arbitrary. It follows directly from geometry. Once gravity becomes geometry, many puzzles resolve themselves quietly. Why do orbits persist without effort? Because they are closed paths in curved space. Why does light bend? Because it follows the straightest paths available, and those paths are curved. Why is gravity always attractive? Because curvature created by mass naturally directs paths inward. There is no need for a pulling mechanism. The universe does not need to decide to attract. It simply exists in a way that makes separation difficult. This also explains why gravity grows stronger near massive objects without changing character. The curvature becomes steeper. Paths bend more sharply. Time slows further. Nothing new is added. The same principle applies at every scale. This consistency is part of gravity's quiet confidence. Other forces change behavior with energy. They can repel or attract. They can be screened or amplified. Gravity does none of this. It responds only to mass and energy, and it does so by shaping the same underlying fabric every time. This makes gravity uniquely patient. It does not need to act quickly. It does not need to correct errors. Given enough time, geometry does all the work. This patience is why gravity dominates the universe at large scales. Other forces matter at small distances. They bind atoms and molecules. They govern chemistry. But over vast distances, those forces fade. Gravity remains, not because it is stronger, but because it accumulates. Curvature adds to curvature. Mass adds to mass. Over millions of years, small biases become large structures. Galaxies form not because gravity pulls matter violently inward, but because curved space gently guides motion into patterns that persist. Filaments emerge where geometry allows matter to flow. Voids remain where geometry discourages accumulation. The universe becomes structured not by forceful assembly, but by permissive shaping. This is difficult to hold in the mind. We are used to thinking of causes acting on effects. Gravity as geometry removes this simplicity. Instead of actions, there are conditions. Instead of pushes, there are pathways. The universe unfolds because it is shaped the way it is. This does not make gravity mysterious in a mystical sense. It makes it fundamental. Gravity is not one phenomenon among many. It is the framework within which phenomena occur. This framework does not ask for attention. It does not announce itself. It simply makes certain motions possible and others unlikely. Once this is understood, the idea of gravity as attraction begins to feel like a convenient fiction, useful, accurate in limited contexts, but incomplete. At deeper levels, gravity does not pull objects together. It brings distances into relationship. It alters how separation is measured. It reshapes what it means to move. This is why gravity became geometry. Not because geometry was more elegant, but because it was unavoidable. There was no other way to account for what gravity does without breaking consistency elsewhere. And once gravity is seen this way, it becomes clear that we are not standing on a planet being pulled down. We are resting inside a curved region of space and time, following a path that has been interrupted by the ground. We are not held in place by force, we are constrained by structure. This realization does not make the universe colder or more mechanical. It makes it quieter. There is no invisible hand pulling on everything, no cosmic effort being expended. There is only shape, and everything that exists moves within it, calmly, inevitably, without ever needing to be told where to go. From here, gravity's role will expand again, because once space itself can curve, it can do more than guide motion. It can alter history. It can change the order of events. It can slow the flow of time to such an extent that futures and pasts no longer align the way intuition expects. Gravity, understood as geometry, does not just shape paths, it reshapes experience, and that is where the story grows even quieter and even more profound. Gravity, once understood as pull and later as geometry, has another role that is even more subtle, more intimate. It affects time itself, not in a metaphorical sense, not in poetic exaggeration, but literally. The passage of moments, the unfolding of events, the rhythm of life, everything is altered by gravity's quiet presence. At human scale, time feels uniform. Seconds tick at a steady pace. A clock seems reliable, a heartbeat predictable. Our lives unfold in a framework so consistent that we rarely question it. But this apparent constancy is an illusion born of the modest scale of our surroundings. Consider the simplest example: a clock on the floor and a clock on the ceiling. Both are on the same planet. Both share the same environment, more or less. Yet, the one closer to Earth's centre ticks ever so slightly slower. The difference is minuscule, imperceptible without precise instruments. But it is real. Time itself stretches and compresses depending on the depth within a gravitational field. This is where intuition falters. Time is supposed to be absolute. It is supposed to flow identically for all observers. But gravity demonstrates that time is local, dependent on position, on mass, on motion. Even the strongest human sense of chronology is only approximately correct, valid in regions of weak gravity and slow motion. The effect grows with mass. Near a star, seconds stretch more noticeably. Near a neutron star, time slows dramatically. A second there may correspond to years far away. The passage of time is no longer a universal metronome but a variable landscape. Moments are weighted, stretched or compressed according to the structure of space itself. Imagine what this implies for living beings. Life near strong gravity moves slower relative to distant observers. A creature orbiting a dense star could experience a lifetime in what, for someone far away, is a fraction of that time. Age, which we measure in ticks of a clock, is no longer absolute. It depends on the gravitational context. The universe allows different regions to have different temporal rhythms. Even at planetary scales, this influence is subtle, but present. Satellites in orbit age slightly faster than objects on Earth. Their clocks drift relative to terrestrial clocks, not because of mechanical error, but because the flow of time itself is altered by the weaker gravity above the surface. Global positioning systems must account for this effect, or navigational errors accumulate. Time in these systems is a pliable dimension, moulded by gravity. This is where the ordinary notion of causality begins to stretch. Causality at first seems straightforward. Causes precede effects. Events follow a predictable sequence, but when time itself can dilate, the sequence of events becomes relative. Two observers at different gravitational potentials may disagree on the order of events, not arbitrarily, but according to the geometry they inhabit. What feels simultaneous to one is stretched or reordered for another. This is no longer a matter of perception or measurement error. It is the universe revealing that the flow of time is not uniform, not absolute. It is shaped, just like motion, just like distance, by the curvature of space and the weight of matter. To grasp this fully, one must shift perspective away from human experience. We are accustomed to seconds ticking identically everywhere because we live in a gentle gravitational environment. Earth's mass is large enough to hold us, but small enough to make time's variation imperceptible. But imagine standing on a neutron star. You would age slowly, almost frozen relative to someone watching from afar. Your heartbeat, your thought, even the passage of pain and joy, every experience stretches. Gravity is not just holding you down, it is pacing the rhythm of your existence. The principle scales up. Near a black hole, time slows drastically. At the event horizon, it approaches a halt relative to distant observers. In these regions, causality itself is distorted, but not broken. Sequences remain logically consistent for those within the gravitational field, yet for distant observers, events appear stretched into eternity. The universe offers multiple temporal perspectives, each valid within its context. Even planets, stars, and galaxies participate in this slow dance. The history of the universe, the evolution of structures, the unfolding of cosmic events, all of it is subtly conditioned by gravity's influence on time. Matter is not simply moving through space. It is moving through spacetime, which bends, stretches, and flows differently depending on where mass concentrates. Collisions, formations, orbits, decays, everything proceeds at a pace dictated by the underlying curvature. Consider a spaceship travelling near a massive star. From the perspective of the travellers, a few hours may pass, yet distant observers see days or years elapse. The same events unfold, but the perception of duration is profoundly altered. Gravity shapes not just where you can go, but how long it takes to experience anything at all. This also reframes the idea of history and observation. Astronomers looking at distant galaxies see light that left those stars millions or billions of years ago. The light travels through curved space, through regions where time itself may have flowed differently. What we observe is filtered not only by distance, but by the variable rhythm of space-time along the path. Our measurements are conditioned by the universe's temporal geometry. At human scale, we rarely notice these effects. A second remains a second for us. Minutes, hours, and years feel stable. But gravity reminds us that these measures are context-dependent, contingent on our location in space. Time is not a universal stage upon which life unfolds. It is a malleable dimension, intimately tied to the weight of matter and the shape of space. This insight quiets the mind. We realize that clocks, aging, and causality are not absolute anchors. They are local phenomena shaped by the invisible hand of gravity. It is not dramatic, not violent, not urgent. It simply persists, quietly pacing the universe in a way that is both inevitable and invisible. even our own lives are embedded within this slow influence. From birth to death, every heartbeat, thought, and action occurs in a temporal context conditioned by Earth's mass. The ground beneath us, the oceans, the atmosphere, all maintained by gravity, also maintain the rhythm of our experience. We age in a subtle sync with the curvature of space-time around us. Across the cosmos, this effect accumulates. Galaxies orbit centers of mass. Clusters of galaxies evolve over eons. The universe itself expands, carrying regions of differing gravitational potentials. Time flows differently in each region. Histories diverge, yet all follow the same geometric logic. And within this framework, causality retains coherence. Events unfold according to the curvature of space-time. No contradictions arise, no paradoxes appear. Even as intuition fails, the underlying consistency remains unbroken. Gravity, understood as the architect of space-time, does not merely shape motion, it shapes duration. It determines the tempo of existence. It paces the evolution of stars, the orbits of planets, the lives of observers. The universe is, in this sense, quieter than one might imagine. Time itself does not rush. It does not hesitate. It flows according to gravity's geometry, steady and patient. Even as individual observers perceive acceleration or delay, the grand structure remains coherent. This perspective transforms our relationship with time. We see our lives not as universal benchmarks, but as threads woven into a larger temporal fabric. A second is not absolute, but locally precise. A lifetime is not universal, but uniquely measured within its gravitational context. In this quiet, patient influence, there is both awe and comfort. Gravity does not force us to obey. It does not strike, pull, or resist overtly. It only shapes the medium in which our moments unfold, imperceptibly pacing the cosmos while we experience our own intimate tempo. And once this is understood, the universe feels both larger and more intimate. Each heartbeat, each thought, each observation is embedded within the silent rhythm imposed by mass and geometry. Time itself, stretched and curved, becomes a witness to the quiet power of gravity, a force that is no longer force at all, but the patient, pervasive shaping of existence itself. From here, the next step in the journey is not about motion or mass, but about accumulation, how gravity organizes the immense structures of the universe over cosmic time, building galaxies, clusters, and the vast cosmic web. Time and shape merge, and gravity guides not just matter, but the unfolding history of all things. Beyond the stars, beyond the regions where light travels freely, gravity begins to tell a story that cannot be seen. It reveals structure without substance. It traces contours where nothing luminous exists. It maps patterns invisible to the eye, yet decisive in shaping the universe. At human scale, we infer the unseen all the time. We feel a draft from an open window, even if we cannot see the wind. We notice a hidden object when a surface is uneven, or when a shadow shifts unexpectedly. The evidence of presence often exceeds what can be directly observed. Gravity operates in a similar but vastly more profound way. It is the universe's means of revealing the hidden, of making the invisible tangible through its effects. Massless or faint objects may leave no light, no radiation, no trace that telescopes can capture. Yet their presence is undeniable because their gravity shapes the motion of everything nearby. This is the realm where intuition falters completely. You cannot see gravity itself. You cannot feel it directly in freefall. You cannot touch it, taste it, or smell it. All you can do is observe its consequences. Astronomers noticed this first in galaxies. Stars moved in ways that did not match the mass visible in gas and dust. Outer stars orbited faster than expected. Rotation curves were inconsistent with the light alone. It was as if the galaxies contained far more weight than anything detected. Something unseen was shaping motion. Something massive was guiding stars along their paths, bending their orbits with silent insistence. Gravity became the evidence of the invisible. It traced a scaffold that could not be illuminated by conventional observation. This invisible presence was later named dark matter, not because it was inherently mysterious, but because it was unlit. It could not be detected with telescopes, cameras, or spectrographs. Its signature was in the geometry of motion, the bending of paths, the speed of rotation, the deflection of light. The concept is subtle. Gravity does not care whether matter emits light. It responds to mass, period, and so, even without luminous evidence, the universe reveals its hidden scaffolding. Galaxy clusters, for instance, act as laboratories for this unseen architecture. The space between clusters is permeated by a gravitational field dominated not by bright galaxies, but by matter we cannot detect directly. Light travelling through these regions is subtly bent, gravitational lensing, a phenomenon entirely predicted by the curvature of spacetime. Where there is no light, the warp in space still manifests. This is gravity at its most patient and quiet. It is not constructing in the sense of applying force. It is not sculpting in the sense of touch or push. It is defining the terrain along which matter moves, even when that matter is itself invisible. To grasp this, it helps to shift perspective from individual stars to the cosmic web. Galaxies are not scattered randomly. They trace filaments, sheets, and voids. Clusters form at the intersections of filaments. Vast empty spaces stretch between them. This architecture is determined largely by the distribution of dark matter, the unseen mass that gravity reveals. Every galaxy is a marker on this hidden map. Every orbiting star, every colliding cluster, every flowing stream of gas points to the contours of an invisible framework. Gravity is the only sense capable of perceiving it. It translates absence into structure, emptiness into guidance. And yet, the scale of this scaffold is almost incomprehensible. Filaments stretch hundreds of millions of light years. Voids span comparable distances. Galaxies move along gradients defined not by light, but by gravity's pervasive shaping. The universe is threaded with invisible strands, holding together a web that can only be inferred through motion and curvature. Our tools for detecting this structure rely entirely on secondary effects. We measure the bending of light from distant quasars. We track the velocities of satellite galaxies. We map how clusters interact, collide, and merge. From these data, we reconstruct the contours of a mass that we cannot see. Gravity becomes a witness to itself, pointing toward the presence of matter otherwise undetectable. This deepens the perspective on cosmic scale. Not only does gravity shape paths in space-time, but it also defines the framework of the universe. The visible cosmos is as decoration, a pattern painted atop an invisible foundation. Without gravity, without this silent influence, galaxies would not orbit, clusters would not form, and the universe would be far less structured than we observe. It is here that the mind begins to struggle. Human intuition relies on visibility and interaction. We assume that what matters must be detectable, but gravity teaches a different lesson. Presence is not contingent on light or sensation. It is contingent on influence. If something moves the universe, even subtly, it exists. Even more extraordinary is the way this unseen scaffold persists over time. Dark matter does not radiate energy. It does not experience friction. It does not collide in the way ordinary matter does. Its motion is slow, smooth, cumulative. It creates corridors through which galaxies flow. It forms basins in which stars collect. It establishes the paths along which cosmic history unfolds. Gravity once again demonstrates its patience. It is not urgent, not dramatic, not immediate. It does not announce its presence with flash or bang. Its influence is subtle, persistent, and enduring. Over billions of years, these small, silent effects build vast, coherent structures. This reveals another lesson about observation. Seeing is not always necessary to know. Motion betrays presence. Paths reveal structure. Even in the darkest regions, the universe communicates through geometry and movement. Gravity is the interpreter. It is worth pausing here to consider scale. The Milky Way, a galaxy we call home, sits within a filament of the cosmic web. Our solar system traces its orbit, influenced by the distribution of both visible stars and dark matter. Our night sky is a surface appearance, masking the deep gravitational scaffolding that gives coherence to the region. Clusters thousands of times larger than our galaxy move as a result of mass we cannot see. The Virgo cluster, the Coma cluster, and the Perseus-Pisces supercluster all participate in a cosmic dance dictated by invisible weights. Our measurements of redshift and velocity, of lensing and orbital motion, are the only evidence of the unseen. Gravity itself provides the map. At this scale, The universe is a vast interconnected system of influence rather than a collection of objects. Mass is not a property of individual points alone. It accumulates, overlaps and interacts through the geometry of spacetime. The invisible becomes the organizing principle. What is unseen is, in fact, the foundation. Even light, the ultimate messenger, obeys these unseen forces. Photons follow curved paths dictated by the total mass along their journey, bending subtly, sometimes dramatically, as they encounter concentrations of dark matter. The universe's history is written in these curves. We read it not directly, but through gravity's guiding hand. This quiet power is humbling. The largest structures in the universe, the scaffolding upon which galaxies are arrayed, cannot be detected by sight alone. They are known entirely through consequence, through the subtle shaping of motion, through the bending of space-time. Here, gravity teaches a profound lesson about knowledge itself. We are never limited to what is immediately observable. We can perceive presence indirectly. We can trace structure through influence. We can understand the unseen by observing the ways it shapes the seen. And yet, for all its scale and subtlety, this influence is calm. There is no rush, no urgency, no drama. The invisible scaffold exists because it must, because the universe follows the paths dictated by mass and motion. Gravity is, in this sense, the ultimate quiet architect. It reveals the hidden, organizes the unlit, and shapes the cosmos in ways that our senses alone could never detect. Without it, the universe would be an incoherent scattering. With it, even the dark becomes structured, connected, and meaningful in a way that transcends sight. This is the scale where understanding gravity demands patience. It is not enough to measure motion, not enough to chart stars. One must consider the invisible threads connecting everything. One must trace the silent hand shaping not just individual systems, but the large-scale architecture of the cosmos itself. And when this is understood, perspective deepens. The visible universe is no longer the sum of what we see. It is the tip of a vast hidden structure, gravity's quiet scaffold, a framework of influence that endures beyond human observation, extending across time and space. The lesson is simple but profound. The universe is shaped by what cannot be seen. Gravity is the means of perceiving it, and through this understanding, we glimpse the true depth, scale, and patience of the cosmos. A framework not of spectacle, but of subtle, enduring structure. Across the vast expanses of the universe, galaxies are not scattered at random. They trace paths, form patterns, and cluster together in ways that are invisible to casual observation. When we look up at the night sky, we see stars grouped in our own galaxy, perhaps a few distant smudges from neighbouring galaxies. Yet this familiar view conceals a much larger truth. Galaxies themselves are threads in an immense interconnected network, the cosmic web, and that network exists entirely because of gravity. At first, the term cosmic web may evoke imagery of fine threads woven delicately across the universe. This is in a way accurate, yet these threads are not silk or fibre. They're enormous filaments composed of dark matter, gas and galaxies, stretching across hundreds of millions of light years. The spaces between these filaments, vast voids nearly empty of luminous matter, are equally important. They define the shape of the web. They're carved by the same force that guides the smallest falling apple and the collapse of massive stars, gravity. To comprehend the cosmic web, it is helpful to start small and scale outward. Consider a single galaxy, like the Milky Way. It is massive in human terms, yet its mass is modest compared to the gravitational structures that contain it. Our galaxy does not exist in isolation. It is part of a local group, moving in concert with nearby galaxies toward a common gravitational centre. This motion is not arbitrary. It is guided by the unseen scaffolding of mass, the combination of visible matter and the pervasive dark matter that dominates the gravitational field. Scale up. Groups of galaxies coalesce into clusters. Clusters cluster themselves into superclusters, and these superclusters align along filaments, leaving enormous voids between them. At this scale, the universe is no longer a collection of independent objects. It is a network defined by the distribution of mass, flowing naturally along gradients in the gravitational field. Gravity's role in this process is subtle and continuous. It does not push or pull with bursts of energy. It does not dictate precise trajectories with a ruler. Instead, It shapes the terrain along which galaxies naturally move. Where mass accumulates, paths converge. Where mass is sparse, paths diverge. Over billions of years, this gentle shaping produces structures that are coherent, large, and strikingly intricate. One of the most revealing methods to observe this web is gravitational lensing. When light from a distant galaxy passes near a massive concentration of matter, its path bends. Not just a little, but enough to distort and magnify the background galaxy. Through careful mapping of these distortions, astronomers can reconstruct the underlying mass distribution, including the dark matter filaments invisible to direct observation. In this sense, the cosmic web is not just a theoretical model. It is a real, measurable structure, revealed by the subtle, patient influence of gravity. This web is astonishing not only for its scale, but for its consistency. Despite the diversity of galaxies, clusters, and voids, the patterns are remarkably similar across the observable universe. Filaments stretch between nodes. Voids persist. Clusters form where filaments intersect. This repetition suggests that the same fundamental processes govern cosmic evolution everywhere. Gravity, operating over vast distances and immense timescales, imposes order on what might otherwise appear chaotic. Even the motions of individual galaxies are shaped by the web. They do not drift randomly through space. They move along filaments, drawn toward nodes of higher mass. A galaxy's trajectory is guided by the curvature of space itself, subtly influenced by every other mass in the surrounding region. Over time, these movements amplify density variations, strengthening filaments and deepening voids. Gravity is not acting in bursts, but in quiet persistence, shaping the universe cumulatively. The cosmic web also illustrates the interplay of the visible and invisible. Most of the mass that defines its structure is dark matter. Galaxies, gas, and stars are the luminous markers, the highlights on a framework that is otherwise hidden. Without gravity, without this invisible scaffolding, galaxies would not arrange themselves into filaments or clusters. They would float more randomly, the universe would appear more uniform, and the grand patterns we observe would not exist. The scale of the web is difficult to grasp. Filaments can stretch across hundreds of millions of light years. Clusters at the intersections contain thousands of galaxies, each with billions of stars. The voids between filaments are enormous, sometimes tens or hundreds of millions of light years across, regions almost entirely empty of luminous matter. These distances are beyond human experience, yet gravity operates smoothly across them, shaping motion and structure with the same principles that govern our own solar system. To understand the cosmic web, it helps to consider time as well as space. The universe is dynamic. Filaments grow and evolve, clusters merge, galaxies collide. Yet throughout all this change, the web persists. Gravity maintains the skeleton even as individual components move, appear, and disappear. It is both stable and flexible, resilient to local disturbances, but responsive to overall mass distribution. Observationally, the web has been mapped through galaxy surveys and simulations. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, for example, catalogued millions of galaxies, revealing the filamentary structure in detail. Simulations of cosmic evolution, using only the known laws of gravity and initial density fluctuations, reproduce similar webs. These results underscore the universality of gravity's organizing power. Given time and mass, the universe arranges itself into this immense network with remarkable regularity. The cosmic web also reframes our sense of place. Earth, the solar system, and the Milky Way are tiny components within a vast structured environment. Our galaxy sits along a filament stretching for millions of light years, moving within the gravitational potential defined by surrounding mass. What we perceive as motion, rotation, and drift is actually the response to this enormous invisible influence. We are, in effect, passengers on the streams of the cosmic web, tracing paths laid out by gravity over billions of years. At this scale, intuition is again challenged. We can imagine falling, orbiting, and colliding within our solar system. We can imagine the gravity of a planet or star. But the cosmic web is orders of magnitude larger, with interactions that are cumulative and diffuse rather than immediate. Yet the principles remain the same. Mass curves space, motion follows geometry, and structure emerges over time. The difference is one of scale and subtlety. The elegance of the web lies in its quiet logic. No central intelligence guides its formation. No external hand places galaxies or filaments. Everything unfolds according to the same universal laws applied across immense distances. Gravity alone, patient and persistent, creates patterns that are coherent, intricate, and enduring. Dark matter, though unseen, defines the web's spine. Its distribution dictates where filaments form, where voids persist, and where clusters collect. Luminous matter, by contrast, is the ornament, tracing the hidden contours but not defining them. Gravity, then, is both the architect and the stage, invisible yet essential, shaping not only motion, but the very arrangement of the universe on the largest scale. The cosmic web also offers perspective on time and history. Galaxies follow these filaments across billions of years, interacting and merging, yet the web remains. Local events, collisions, star formation, supernovae occur within this overarching structure, constrained by paths defined by gravity. Time and space are intertwined, with the web providing the geometric context in which events unfold. Ultimately, the cosmic web is gravity made visible through consequence. We cannot see the dark matter directly, yet its presence is revealed in the positions, motions, and interactions of galaxies. We cannot perceive the full curvature of spacetime directly, yet light bends, galaxies move, and the universe exhibits patterns of extraordinary coherence. Gravity, patient and persistent, renders the invisible tangible. Our place within this structure is both humbling and clarifying. The Milky Way is a single filament within a vast network. Our solar system is a tiny point along its path. Yet by observing, calculating, and understanding, we can perceive the contours of the invisible, mapping the architecture of the universe itself. The cosmic web demonstrates that gravity is not merely a local force or a geometric curiosity. It is the organizing principle at the larger scale. It defines motion, arranges structure, and shapes history across hundreds of millions of light years. The universe is a network, not random, not chaotic, but patterned, flowing along pathways laid by invisible influence. Gravity's quiet work is everywhere. It is subtle, cumulative, and patient. It shapes the cosmic web over eons, arranging galaxies into threads, clusters into nodes, and voids into vast empty regions. It's both invisible and essential, both gentle and inexorable. As we consider the cosmic web, we're reminded of our own smallness. Our lives, our solar system, our galaxy are mere threads along a much larger network. Yet through observation and understanding, we glimpse the hidden architecture, tracing the paths that gravity has quietly laid across the universe. This is gravity at its most expansive, not pulling, not tugging, not forcing, simply shaping, guiding, and revealing structure at a scale that defies ordinary perception, yet is entirely consistent with the fundamental principles we have followed since the first falling apple. Through the cosmic web, gravity shows us that the universe is ordered, coherent, and interconnected in ways that are invisible yet unmistakable. It teaches patience, quiet persistence, and the subtlety of influence across unimaginable scales. And in doing so, it deepens both our understanding and our sense of wonder. Black holes exist at the extreme edge of what gravity can accomplish. They're not just strong, they are uncompromising. Their gravity distilled to its purest, most absolute form, where the familiar rules of motion, time, and space are stretched to the point of transformation. Nothing in the universe behaves quite like a black hole, and yet everything that falls within its influence obeys the same principles that govern an apple dropping from a tree or a planet orbiting its star. Understanding black holes is not about spectacle or drama. It is about encountering the ultimate limit of gravity's reach and patience. To approach a black hole in thought, it is best to begin with scale. Even a black hole formed from a single star can be many times more massive than the Sun, yet it can be compact, with all that mass concentrated within a radius so small that it defies ordinary visualization. A stellar mass black hole might compress 10 suns into a sphere barely 30 kilometers across. A supermassive black hole at the heart of a galaxy can contain billions of solar masses, its gravitational influence extending over thousands of light years. This scale is almost impossible to internalize, yet gravity operates seamlessly across it, without hesitation or contradiction. Here, human intuition fails entirely. We are accustomed to forces weakening with distance, to accelerations being gradual, and to motion responding to tangible pushes. Near a black hole, those assumptions break down. Space curves so sharply that the straightest possible paths, the geodesics, are no longer what we expect. Time slows dramatically relative to distant observers. Paths that appear direct from afar are spirals, loops, and deflections near the horizon. The closer one approaches, the more extreme the curvature, until the familiar concepts of here and there lose meaning. The event horizon, the boundary from which nothing can escape, is the ultimate expression of gravity's limit. It is not a surface in the conventional sense. It is a condition of space-time, defined entirely by the mass within. Cross it, and the geometry dictates that all paths lead inward. Motion cannot escape. Even light, travelling at the universal speed limit, cannot find a path outward. Gravity here is not a pull. It is an environment from which escape is geometrically impossible. For an observer falling toward a black hole, experience is paradoxical. Locally, one may feel nothing extraordinary as the horizon is crossed. No sudden forces act. No alarms signal the transition. The sensation of freefall persists. Yet, from the perspective of a distant observer, the falling object appears to slow, stretched over time, fading asymptotically as light struggles to escape. This divergence between local and distant perception embodies gravity's absolute nature. It is fully impartial, indifferent, and entirely defined by space-time geometry. Black holes also redefine time in ways that are both literal and profound. Near a massive black hole, time dilation is extreme. Seconds for someone close to the horizon can correspond to years far away. The familiar march of moments is no longer uniform. Causality remains intact locally, but the universe's clock diverges dramatically from its distant counterpart. Here, time itself is a malleable medium, stretched and twisted by the ultimate concentration of mass. Consider the implications for observation and interaction. A spacecraft approaching a black hole experiences gravitational tidal forces, differences in curvature that stretch and compress its structure along different axes. These effects grow as one nears the singularity, where the curvature theoretically becomes infinite. Even for a theoretical observer, the notion of uniform geometry ceases to exist. Space and time become so entwined and extreme that the usual separation between distance, duration, and motion dissolves. Despite this, black holes are not chaotic or random. Their influence is precise, predictable, and consistent with the same principles that govern all of gravity. Paths are determined by geometry. Light bends exactly as it must. Orbits form where they can. Motion is entirely lawful, though the laws operate at the limits of human intuition. The singularity, the point where curvature becomes infinite, is perhaps the most radical consequence of uncompromising gravity. Here, the familiar rules of physics collapse. Density becomes inconceivably high. Space as a geometric backdrop ceases to exist in any ordinary sense. Time may lose meaning. Yet even at this limit, the black hole remains a structure defined by mass and space-time. It is gravity's purest expression, a boundary to understanding that is both absolute and consistent. Even more remarkable is the black hole's role in shaping its environment. Accretion disks, jets, and the orbits of nearby stars are all organized by the curvature surrounding it. Matter falling toward the horizon follows predictable paths. Energy is released in patterns dictated by gravity, not by chaos or forceful action. The black hole's influence is expansive, yet subtle, transforming surroundings not through brute force, but through persistent curvature. Supermassive black holes residing at galactic centers illustrate this interplay on enormous scales. Their gravity influences entire galaxies, guiding the orbits of stars and gas clouds. They regulate formation and evolution over billions of years. Even in these extreme conditions, gravity remains the same principle we first encountered on Earth. Mass determines curvature, and motion follows geometry. The scale has changed, but the underlying truth remains. Black holes also reveal the interconnection between gravity, space, and time in the most literal sense. Near a horizon, space itself is stretched along one axis, compressed along another. Time is dilated, yet locally consistent. The geometry is not just a stage for events. It defines what events can occur, how they proceed, and how they're experienced by different observers. Gravity is no longer a force acting within space. It is the structure of space itself, uncompromised and absolute. These extremes also challenge our understanding of observation. Information carried by light from near a black hole is delayed, stretched, and redshifted. The farther away the observer, the more time appears to slow for events near the horizon. Yet locally, physics proceeds without interruption. Cause and effect are preserved, even as the perception of duration diverges radically. Black holes thus illustrate the ultimate limitation of human intuition. We cannot experience the singularity, the extreme curvature, or the full-time dilation firsthand. Our senses and experience are grounded in gentle gravity, in the predictable pull of planets and stars. But through mathematics, observation, and simulation, we understand the principles governing these extremes. Gravity scales without compromise, indifferent to human perception, yet entirely consistent with itself. In many ways, black holes are a culmination of the story of gravity. From the falling apple to the shaping of galaxies, gravity has shown patience, persistence, and universality. With black holes, it reveals its ultimate potential, to organize, to define, and to constrain the universe in ways that stretch time, bend space, and push intuition to its limits. Even the notion of nothingness is reshaped by black holes. What appears empty is defined by gravity. Paths exist only as possibilities within curvature. Events occur only along geodesics. The concept of absence itself is framed by the force that shapes all motion. Black holes also demonstrate that limits in gravity are not abrupt. They are gradual. Curvature increases progressively as one approaches a horizon. Time dilation grows incrementally. Paths become more constrained. This continuity underscores gravity's patient nature. It does not shock or demand attention. It accumulates, inexorably guiding motion toward its ultimate expression. And yet, despite all extremes, black holes remain quietly consistent with the principles observed elsewhere. The laws governing orbits, light bending, and free fall remain valid. They are simply applied in conditions far beyond ordinary human experience. Gravity's universality is thus most apparent at its limit. Uncompromising, extreme, but perfectly lawful. In this way, black holes are gravity distilled. They strip away every secondary effect, every complicating factor, leaving only curvature, mass, and motion. They show what gravity is when unbound by scale or moderation, absolute, patient, pervasive, and entirely indifferent to human perception. By contemplating black holes, we confront the ultimate limit of gravity and, in doing so, the ultimate limit of intuition. We see that gravity is not a push or a pull, not a force to resist, but the fundamental shaping of space and time itself. From freefall on Earth to the event horizon of a supermassive black hole, the principle is the same. Mass defines geometry and motion follows it. Every orbit, every path, every temporal rhythm is a response to this universal law. Black holes, then, are not just objects. They are the purest expression of the cosmic principle we have been tracing from the beginning. They are gravity without compromise, the ultimate illustration of how mass, space, and time interconnect. And in their silent, uncompromising existence, they offer the clearest view of gravity in its most elemental, absolute, and inevitable form. We are left with perspective, that gravity, in its patient, persistent, and universal application, defines the ultimate contours of existence. Black holes are not violent anomalies. They are the inevitable consequences of mass interacting with space and time. They are the limit case, the extreme expression, the ultimate manifestation of the principle that has shaped everything, from apples falling to stars orbiting, from the Milky Way's structure to the cosmic web itself. In this quiet, uncompromising reality, gravity reveals its essence, absolute, patient, and all-encompassing. The universe, viewed through the lens of black holes, is a cosmos defined by curvature, by paths, by time itself shaped by mass. And this, at last, is gravity without compromise. Gravity is not just a force, a curvature, or a field of influence. It is the silent thread that connects the past, present, and future of the universe. Every orbit, every path of light, every collapse of matter is a record of history written into space-time itself. From the smallest pebble on Earth to the largest supercluster of galaxies, gravity shapes continuity, preserving a memory of motion, mass, and interaction that extends across billions of years. At human scale, history is recorded in artifacts in text and memory. We measure time by clocks, mark events by calendars, and preserve knowledge through observation. Gravity operates in a similar way, but its medium is not paper or digital record. It is space-time itself. Mass and energy move, interact, and rearrange, leaving a record in the curvature of the universe. Paths traced by objects, the slow accumulation of matter, and the evolution of cosmic structures all form a memory written into the fabric of reality. Even in the simplest case, this memory is evident. A stone thrown into a pond disturbs the surface. Ripples propagate outward. If one could perceive them for long enough, they would encode the passage of the stone, its trajectory, and its energy. Gravity behaves in a comparable, though far subtler way. Objects moving through space leave imprints of their motion, influencing the paths of others, guiding structures over time, and embedding their history in the curvature that governs motion. Consider planetary systems. Earth orbits the Sun not because the Sun pulls with an arbitrary force, but because the Sun's mass defines the curvature of space around it. This curvature is the record of the Sun's mass distribution and its interaction with other bodies. The planet's orbits preserve this information. Each trajectory is a living memory of gravitational influence, a continuously unfolding record of history that endures for billions of years. Even as planets slowly migrate, collide, or are ejected from systems, their motion traces the history of forces they have experienced. The same principle extends to galaxies. Stars orbit galactic centers along paths determined by the distribution of both luminous and dark matter. Clusters of galaxies move through space in ways dictated by the invisible scaffolding of dark matter. Cosmic voids exist where matter has been pulled away over eons. Every structure, every motion is a historical record embedded in geometry. Gravity does not erase the past, it accumulates it, layering the memory of motion and mass over cosmic time. Time itself is entwined with this memory. Near massive objects, time is slowed. Events unfold at different rates depending on gravitational context. This means that history is not uniform across the universe. The passage of moments, the duration of events, and even the sequence of occurrences are conditioned by mass and curvature. Gravity creates not only spatial continuity, but temporal continuity, recording history differently in each region of spacetime. In larger structures, this becomes even more apparent. The cosmic web, stretching across hundreds of millions of light years, preserves a record of matter's motion and accumulation. Filaments mark where mass concentrated early in cosmic history. Voids preserve regions that resisted accumulation. Galaxy clusters at the intersections of filaments reveal paths of merging and growth. The large-scale structure of the universe is a memory of billions of years of gravitational evolution, encoded in geometry rather than light. Even black holes carry this memory. The matter falling into a black hole, the paths of orbiting objects, the distortions of light near the horizon, all are records of prior configurations. The singularity, in a sense, is the extreme condensation of this record, the ultimate archive of mass and space-time interactions. And yet, even as extreme as black holes are, they participate in continuity. They influence the motion of nearby matter, regulate star formation, and guide galactic evolution. History does not end. It accumulates, reverberates, and persists through gravitational influence. At the larger scale, the universe itself is shaped by the accumulation of these histories. Galaxies form, collide, and merge along paths determined by mass distributions that themselves are products of earlier cosmic epochs. Clusters grow as smaller groups accrete. Voids expand as matter is drawn toward denser regions. The universe's structure is a continuous record of mass interacting with space over billions of years. Gravity preserves this record in the curvature and connectivity of space-time, allowing each event to contribute to the evolution of the whole. In this light, gravity can be seen as a kind of memory device. Every motion, every accumulation, every orbit is stored in the geometry that defines motion. Unlike human memory, it is indifferent and unbiased. It does not prioritize one event over another. It does not forget or distort. It accumulates relentlessly, shaping the universe's evolution with patient consistency. The influence of gravity also means that nothing in the universe exists in isolation. Every star, planet, galaxy, and cluster carries the imprint of surrounding mass. Motion is interdependent. Pairs traced by one object influence the trajectories of others. Even distant events, separated by millions of light years, affect the curvature that governs local motion. Gravity weaves a tapestry of continuity, connecting all parts of the cosmos through an unbroken network of influence. This perspective reframes human perception of time and history. We tend to think of our past, present, and future as a linear sequence of events. Yet in a universe governed by gravity, history is layered, encoded in the structure of space, and revealed by motion. Events overlap, interact, and propagate their influence across vast distances. What seems like isolated occurrences are in reality interconnected through the continuous action of gravity over eons. Even the smallest scales reflect this continuity. Tides on Earth, shaped by the moon and sun, preserve the rhythm of orbital interaction. Seasons, day and night, and climate patterns are all influenced by gravitational interactions over millennia. We experience history directly in these motions: the moon's gradual recession, the subtle shifts in Earth's orbit, the precession of its axis. Gravity embeds time's passage into the rhythm of our environment. At stellar and galactic scales, continuity extends further. Stars form from gas clouds compressed by gravity, live out their lifespans, and return material to the interstellar medium, which in turn collapses to form new stars. Galactic interactions, mergers, and accretions follow paths dictated by mass distributions that are themselves products of prior evolution. Gravity ensures that each generation of matter and energy is linked to the previous one. The universe's history is encoded in every orbit, every collapse, every trajectory. Even light preserves this continuity. Photons travelling across billions of light years carry information not only about their source, but also about the curvature and distribution of mass they encounter along the way. Gravitational lensing bends their paths, stretching and compressing their journey, encoding the influence of unseen structures. By the time these photons reach our instruments, they have traversed a history shaped by gravity, a story of structure and continuity written into space-time itself. Gravity, then, is more than geometry or force. It is the medium through which the universe records its own history. It preserves the memory of events, the accumulation of matter, and the evolution of structures. It connects the immediate with the distant, the small with the immense, the present with the past. Everything that moves through space-time contributes to this ongoing record. This is why the study of gravity is inseparable from the study of cosmic history. To understand the motion of stars, the formation of galaxies, or the evolution of clusters, we must recognize that these processes are cumulative. They are shaped not only by local mass, but by the integrated history of mass and curvature over billions of years. Gravity is patient. It records, accumulates, and shapes with quiet consistency. From this perspective, human existence is also part of continuity. Our planet, our solar system, our galaxy, all are shaped by gravitational interactions stretching back billions of years. Our history is embedded in orbits, tides, and the distribution of mass in the solar system. Even as individual human lifetimes are brief, they unfold within a context defined by the accumulated influence of gravity over cosmic time. Gravity's continuity extends even further, beyond life or observation. Events in the distant universe influence local structures, while local mass contributes to large-scale gravitational fields. Every particle, every photon, every trajectory is connected through the unbroken action of gravity. The universe is a web of motion, memory, and continuity, held together by the patient shaping of space-time. In this way, gravity transforms our understanding of existence. It is not simply a force acting on objects. It is history in motion, memory made manifest, and continuity maintained across space and time. Every motion, every orbit, every accumulation of mass is recorded in curvature, transmitted through paths, and integrated into the structure of the universe. Nothing is lost. Nothing occurs in isolation. Through gravity, the universe remembers itself. It preserves the story of formation, motion, and transformation. It guides structures, accumulates effects, and ensures that the evolution of matter and energy is coherent across cosmic time. Even when we cannot see the distant galaxies or invisible filaments of dark matter, their history is encoded in the curvature that defines their motion. Gravity is the memory keeper, the archivist of the cosmos, and in recognizing this we gain perspective. Our lives, brief though they are part of a continuum shaped by gravity's persistence. The orbits we experience, the tides that affect our planet, the cosmic patterns we observe, all are part of the ongoing story written by mass and curvature. Gravity preserves continuity, linking past, present and future in a coherent, patient framework. Ultimately, gravity is everything shaped. Not only matter, not only motion, not only time, but the memory of all interactions across the cosmos. It is the quiet, persistent thread that binds the universe into a continuous whole. Through its unrelenting and patient action, history is preserved, motion is guided, and the cosmos maintains its coherence. Everything is shaped, everything connected, everything recorded by the patient, silent hand of gravity. And now, as we return from the vast scales of the cosmos, from black holes and the cosmic web, from the curvature of space-time itself, we come back to the world we know. We step out of thought experiments, simulations, and distant observations, and feel the quiet, familiar pull beneath our feet. The sensation is ordinary, gravity holding us down, guiding each step, keeping our bodies aligned with the surface of the Earth, but it is far richer than it first appeared. Every moment of weight, every fall, every orbit, every tide, every movement of the planet beneath the sun, every turning of galaxies around unseen centres, all are connected by the same principle that shapes our own small lived experience. We are still falling, in a sense. Our feet are pressed to the ground by the same force that curves light around stars, that organises clusters of galaxies, that stretches and compresses time near black holes. Gravity is not just something to resist or something that constrains our motion. It is the rhythm of existence itself, the quiet hand guiding events, preserving history, shaping structure, and connecting everything from the tiniest particles to the largest cosmic filaments. Returning to human scale, we notice the familiar differently. The weight of our bodies, the path of a thrown ball, the orbit of the moon, the motion of tides, all these ordinary experiences carry the imprint of cosmic order. What once felt mundane now seems profound. The apple falling from a tree, the planets tracing their orbits, the sunlight bending ever so slightly as it passes Earth, the turning of galaxies, all these are manifestations of the same universal principle, unfolding across unimaginable distances and timescales. Our perspective has changed, quietly and without urgency. We are small, certainly in the vastness of space, but we are connected. Through observation, understanding and reflection, we perceive the underlying logic that binds the universe together. Gravity is both intimate and vast. It holds us close to our home and extends outward to the edges of reality. It links our seconds to cosmic history, our motion to the dance of galaxies, our understanding to the hidden scaffolding of dark matter. There is no need for dramatics, no need for spectacle. The awe comes from recognition, from realizing that what is ordinary is part of something extraordinary. Each heartbeat, each breath, each movement of our bodies is shaped by forces that reach across billions of years, across light years of space. We are participants in a continuous connected universe, still falling through the curvature of space-time, still tracing paths dictated by mass and geometry. And in that falling, in that quiet continuity, there is a profound calm. We do not dominate or command. We observe, understand, and exist within a structure that is patient, immense, and subtle. Gravity, which once seemed so simple, now reveals itself as the ultimate teacher of scale, time, motion, and continuity. It reminds us of our smallness and of our capacity to perceive, to know, and to reflect. In returning to human scale, we carry with us a different awareness. The ordinary pull beneath our feet is no longer merely a mechanical fact. It is history, memory, and cosmic order made tangible. It is the connection between ourselves and everything around us, near and far, past and future. We are, quite literally, in a universe shaped, guided, and preserved by gravity. We step lightly, yet with recognition. The ground is solid, the air is filled with gentle currents, the sky above stretches into vast emptiness, and yet we are connected to all of it. Every movement resonates with unseen influence. Every motion is part of a continuity that began long before us and will extend long after. We are still falling, quietly, steadily, inevitably. And in that falling we understand more, perceive more, and belong more fully to the structure of the cosmos. The world is familiar, yet it is extraordinary. Gravity is still beneath us, holding us, shaping us, connecting us. We are still falling, and now, with a changed understanding, the fall itself is a form of profound knowledge, calm awareness, and quiet wonder.